Hi, I'm Cautex, and on this episode of the latest in Warrior Theorycrafting, I'll be talking about the Necrolord changes and the legendary power changes that are coming in the next patch. Currently, Conqueror's Banner gives crit chance and extra crit damage based on the rage that is spent during the effect. It's clunky and generally pretty garbage. In the upcoming patch, it's being reworked to give a fixed amount of mastery and rage every second for 15 seconds. It's had its cooldown reduced to 2 minutes, and currently on the PTR, it's giving 400 mastery. For Fury, this equates to 16% increased damage while enraged. For Arms, it equates to 12.6% increased damage on targets with deep wounds. And for Prot, it equates to 5.7% chance to block, 17.1% chance to critically block, and 11.4% more attack power. Now, obviously one of the big reasons to go Necrolord is because of the fact that the banner buffs 2 allies as well. In most cases, it will likely be a net raid DPS increase to run Banner over Condemn for both Arms and Fury, assuming that the optimal people get the Banner buff. But to me, the real question is whether or not it's a personal DPS increase. For Arms, the answer to this question is a pretty resounding no. While Execute is still incredibly strong without Condemn, the additional 20% of the fight that you can use Condemn over Execute is just too good to consider dropping. While I'm not as well versed at modeling the damage of other classes and specs, from my sloppy napkin math, in the best case scenario, the raid DPS gained from allies getting the banner buff is only a little bit above the DPS that is lost losing Condemn. For protection, my thoughts essentially mirror what Limit Maximum has said about Necrolord, which is that it's absolutely going to be the best covenant for Prot warriors. The value of Banner for Prot is quite good individually, plus the Banner raid DPS buff, and the rework to Fleshcraft means that Prot warriors who go Necrolord are going to have an additional survivability cooldown. Now for Fury, Condemn isn't as impactful as it is for Arms, and it makes the prospects of running Necrolord for personal DPS a much more interesting question to me. Based on my own modeling, playing Venthyr is worth about 800 DPS. Now when you factor in the bonus mastery and the fact that when you use Banner you can get up to 13% increased strength from the Emini Soulbind, and another 16% from the Veteran's Repute conduit, that right there is worth about 500 DPS. Now for Fury, Banner grants 6 rage per second for 15 seconds, for a total of 90 rage, resulting in an extra rampage over the course of its duration. If you read the tooltip on Recklessness, it's supposed to increase all rage generation, but that unfortunately is probably one of the biggest lies in World of Warcraft, and currently on the PTR, Recklessness does not affect the rage gained by Banner. The extra rampage that you're going to get from using Banner is worth around 80 DPS, though obviously if they change it to make Recklessness double the rage generation, then you'd get 2 extra rampages, and that'd be worth 160. So if you add everything up, this puts going Necrolord at roughly a 580 to 600 DPS benefit, as opposed to the 800 for running Venthyr. This means that it currently appears that Venthyr is still the best general option for your personal DPS as Fury, though Necrolord isn't that far behind, and when you add the raid DPS benefits, there is a strong argument for considering swapping to Necrolord. Depending on how the burst window timings line up for the upcoming raid, the value of Necrolord could be further increased, because using Banner would give you 16% increased damage and 31% increased strength for 15 seconds, on top of, if you're using Recklessness then, 20% increased chance to crit with abilities, and of course the extra rage generation. So in other words, it looks like Necrolord 2-minute burst is going to be absolutely insane. And if that 2-minute burst works really well for a lot of fights in the next raid, then it wouldn't really surprise me to see a lot of Fury warriors turning into Banner boys. Enduring Blow's chance to proc was increased by 10%, and the duration was increased by 1%. Now, this might not seem like a whole lot, but it will actually roughly double the uptime of the effect, from around 15% uptime currently to around 30% uptime. And this uptime is not counting hardcasting Colossus Smash or Warbreaker, which you can delay to maximize the uptime. And that would add roughly another 20% uptime to the Colossus Smash debuff, for a total of nearly 50% uptime on Colossus Smash, which is pretty impressive. While this is an absolutely massive buff to the legendary power, from my analysis, it does not appear that it's going to overtake Signet of Tormented Kings, though we'll just have to wait and see what it looks like when it goes live. Next, Battlelord now triggers from Overpower as opposed to Slam, and the Mortal Strike rage cost reduction has been increased. Honestly, it's still pretty garbage though. Arms rage generation isn't so bad that using this legendary power drastically changes how often we get rage starved, and usually if we do get rage starved we can just charge weave anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. Finally for Arms, Exploiter's damage has been doubled. At 2 stacks, Mortal Strike will hit roughly 50% harder than a 30 rage Condemn, and 16% harder than a 40 rage Condemn. Now I'm not convinced that on most fights this will be a viable legendary. However, I do think that on certain encounters with a really extended Condemn window, could potentially make this a competitive legendary for that fight. Both Will of the Berserker and Cadence of Fajita have had their durations increased from 8 seconds to 12 seconds. This will make playing with either of them much easier to do. Now, the value of Will of the Berserker has consistently hovered around the same as what Deathmaker is, and I think that this change will make it a viable alternative to using that. Cadence has always been a bit behind, and that's going to continue. However, of course, Signet of Tormented Kings still beats all of those options, so it doesn't really matter. Reckless Defense now triggers off all hits as opposed to crits only, and each hit reduces the cooldown by 1 second as opposed to the old 3 seconds. I think that this is a good step in the right direction for this legendary power, but it's still pretty awful. Because I'm illiterate, when I first read the change on Wowhead, I actually thought that they were removing the proc chance of the effect, and I got really excited and then went about modeling the legendary based on that. And even with that monumental misunderstanding, Signet of Tormented Kings would have still been better for the general case, though Reckless Defense would have actually had a clear niche on fights with extended periods of AoE DPS, and also fights requiring funneling of DPS, because cleaved Rampage hits also trigger the cooldown reduction, meaning that if each hit had a 100% chance to proc the cooldown reduction, then in 4-target cleave scenarios, you could reduce the cooldown of Recklessness by 16 seconds per Rampage. Also, in single target scenarios, it was looking like you'd have about a 40% uptime on Recklessness, or 51.6% if you were running Depths of Insanity. And effectively, you'd be able to use Recklessness roughly every 30 seconds, which would have been ridiculous. But this is not the case at all, because that 20% chance to proc is still there. On average, this means that running this legendary power is going to reduce Recklessness by 1 second per Rampage. So, as a comparison, Anger Management reduces the cooldown of Recklessness by 4 seconds per Rampage. This corresponds to Anger Management cutting roughly 30 seconds off the cooldown of Recklessness, and Reckless Defense would only cut off 7 to 8 seconds off Recklessness each time, so it's just not worth it. For protection, the Reprisal redesign seems like it's going to make it a pretty strong choice for Mythic Plus, which will make deciding which legendary to use sort of a 3-way choice between using the Wall, which will obviously give you greater shield wall uptime, Thunderlord, which increases Demo Shout uptime, or Reprisal for more threat and more shield block, and to some extent also Ignore Pain uptime. The Wall is probably the conservative choice here, as there's never really a case where it wouldn't be good, but it also has 0 impact on your DPS. In terms of mitigation, Reprisal will perform better on melee hits than Thunderlord, but obviously Thunderlord is better for casters. The change to Unbreakable Will now makes it a much more interesting choice for potential use in raids. However, the context needed for this to be considered is very specific. The obvious case that comes to mind is an encounter where a small part of the raid will need to be far away from the group, killing some ad that also does some sort of raid damage that would require a raid CD. This is definitely one of those things where it's just going to entirely depend on what comes out in the raid to see if it's going to be useful or not. Lastly, Seismic Reverberation was buffed, so if you're Prot Warrior and all you care about is DPS, and you also like playing the Rextroy Whirlwind one-shot build in your spare time, then you're probably going to be happy with this buff. Now, while this is likely to be the highest DPS option for Prot in Mythic Plus, I honestly think that the Reprisal rework is going to be a much more popular option, as it provides increased mitigation as well as some increased damage. As always, tell me why my opinions are dumb. Also, if you've got any topics you think that I should be researching for the next episode, or if you've done some more of your theory crafting yourself and would like me to highlight your findings, let me know in the comments. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for watching this video, and subscribe for more.